Hi guys, it's Megan. Welcome back to another video. Today we're back in the library to talk about the 9 books that I read in January. And not that you care, but I do have the stats for you. I read 4 fantasy, which is about par for the course, 2 horror, 1 thriller, 1 sci-fi, and 1 nonfiction. And actually 8 out of the 9 of these were adult and only 1 was young adult. I read 6 audiobooks, because that's all I have time for, 2 ebooks and 1 physical book. I read all pretty new books except for 1, and I had 5 female authors and 4 male authors. All the books except for 2 were not part of a series. Only 2 were part of a series. They were the first in a series, neither of which I plan on continuing. Unfortunately for the star reviews, it's not great. I did not have any 5-star reads, but I did have 2 4-star reads, so we'll take it. So let's go through and just briefly talk about each book. I'm doing mostly dedicated reviews for each book, my rapid reviews, so I'm not going to say much about each one, but The Starless Sea was one of the worst books, possibly the worst book I've ever read. Surely it's not the worst book I've ever read. I did make it like 85 or 90% of the way and technically skimmed and read a summary of the rest of it, but I'm still going to count it because I read so much and it's so long. The font's like tiny. There's a lot of words per page. It was like a 20-hour audiobook, and oh my gosh, it was so bad. We've talked about this. It was boring. It had no plot. It was meandering. As I said before, and Leanna from Leanna's Library says that any meaning you found in this book is something that you put on it, because it doesn't have any meaning. It's just beautiful writing, and that is it. If you just want all vibes and no plot, this is the book for you. I don't know if I'll give The Night Circus another shot, because I know I DNF'd it once a long time ago, but that's been a while. I'm not really into circuses though, and I hated this writing style, so probably never gonna try to read this author again. Okay, then I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and I gave it 3 stars, or 2.5. 2.5 because I saw myself not even sometimes wanting to pick it back up. It's not what I expected. I know it's cozy fantasy, and I know cozy fantasy does not have as much, like, any high stakes. This had no stakes though, and I just read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, like at the beginning here of February, and that's what I wanted from cozy fantasy. It did have enough stakes, but just not like crazy stakes. Or even like Nettle and Bone was kind of almost like cozy fantasy to me. So apparently T. Kingfisher is for me. But this one, I just didn't get the hype. Then I read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, and it did. It changed my life, because I'm going to do this summer. I'm going to do her plan. She has, her own folding techniques. She has everything. I did think just a couple parts of this book were silly, like emptying your purse out every single day when you get home and repacking it. Like, I'm just not going to do that. I don't need to. Or thanking the items that you give away as you give them away. I don't know. I'm just not going to do that either. So there were a few kind of weird, quirky things in this book, but other than that, it had some great useful tips. I'm going to buy my own copy and annotate it and actually do the tips she says this summer. Oh, and I gave it 4 stars. I can't remember if I said that. Then I read one of my all-time favorite books now, literally of all time, which is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins. Unfortunately, this is his only book right now, and it was written in 2015, so I just hope he's working on something else, because my gosh, this was one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. Probably the best standalone fantasy I've ever read. I have a dedicated review coming out in just a couple of days for it, or actually it might have already come out at this point, maybe even a couple of days ago, and so you should go watch that. But this is one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. It is so unique. It is so weird. You have no idea where it's going. It is set in the real world, but with like fantastical elements, and so that's what I loved. I love books that are set in the real world, like Harry Potter and the Dresden Files. Like, I guess like even kind of like urban fantasy. I don't know that I'd really call this urban fantasy though, but anyway, it was crazy. It was so well written. I cannot wait to read this again and make like everybody I know read it. Then I read The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Graham. This is my first book by this author, and I'm about to read one of her horror novels called Come Closer. Okay, this book is so similar to the movie The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp from like way back in the day. It's like from the 90s or early 2000s or something. And it was a better version, honestly. So the movie was. So if you were remotely interested in reading this book, I would not, because I think I did give it like 3.5 stars. And maybe I would have given it higher had I not already seen the movie The Ninth Gate, because The Ninth Gate's just better. I mean, this is obviously different, but some of the parts were really bogged down. Like, yes, there's like this magical aspect. I don't want to even tell you too much what it's about, because it's real weird. Just go read about it if you want to read it. Like, it's not even really appropriate to talk about on my YouTube channel. But it focused too much on like her husband having like Alzheimer's and like serious stuff that at the beginning was actually really sad, and then it got like real weird towards the end, and it, like, the two things just didn't mesh together for me. I don't know. So I kind of wish we had less of all the backstory stuff. But other than that, I mean, it was fine, but I would rather watch The Ninth Gate. Next, I read a book technically sort of for school. I read The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kirsten White because my students in my dual credit English 101, 102 class are reading Frankenstein right now. And this was actually one of the choices for our book clubs for the rest of our, like actually it's for our ninth graders. Our school does this thing where like a couple months out of the year for their English class, they do a book club where students read the same book as other students in their group and do activities and whatever. And they have certain choices because it's obviously books that we have multiple copies of, and this is one of the choices. I didn't pick these books. I think the English department did. But anyway, I read it and I loved it. I thought it was just as good, if not better, than Frankenstein. Like I could see why you would have students read this instead of Frankenstein, honestly. It's just more modern, and it's like, what's Elizabeth doing the entire time during Frankenstein? And I think it is helpful to have read Frankenstein before. Like I know most of these students will not have read Frankenstein, so they will think that the creature is named Frankenstein. They'll think he's some like bumbling monster, and they probably just won't get it as much as if they had read the original. So for my students, I told them that for their essay coming up, depending on their essay topic, they could very well also at least read or skim through this and possibly have some sort of really awesome essay topic with the two. But it's just Elizabeth's story, and it gives her so much more like agency, I suppose, because it turns out she's doing everything she's doing for herself. She's like literally going around covering up Victor's messes, and she has to marry Victor or else basically she doesn't really have much chance of a future. She's just going to kind of be put out on the street. So she kind of has to marry Victor, and we don't see any of that in the original Frankenstein, and we just don't see how clever. In this one, she's pretty clever and conniving. So, and about the first 70% is pretty much identical to the book Frankenstein, like imagining what Elizabeth would be doing during all the same events happening. But the last 30% goes off the rails. It varies wildly from the original storyline, and that was my favorite part, although I did think it was a little too fast-paced at the end. It was a little slow at the beginning, and then everything happened at the end a little too quickly. So the pacing was kind of an issue. I actually wound up giving it 3.5 stars, even though I said I really liked it and that I theoretically liked it better than Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite classics, but I would still highly, highly recommend it. Then I read How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. Don't even get me started on this book. I'm going to do a dedicated review for this. It was like 2 stars, if that. It was so bad. It was boring. It was way too long, and it involved dolls, like possessed, haunted, like puppets. I couldn't do it. It's not at all what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was literally going to be a haunted house. It's not. It's like haunted dolls, haunted puppets, mostly this one puppet named Pupkin. If I have to hear the name Pupkin again, I think I'm going to go insane. And it was too long. It was boring. The tone didn't work for me. Like some parts were serious, like real serious, and then it tried to be sort of funny, but it wasn't as funny as the rest of his books. And then there was like this really intense gory scene that was like, whoa, okay, this is too much. And then finally I just kind of skimmed through the rest of the book. So I read 2 more books. The next one was The Bear and the Nightingale. Technically, it was like 90% again, and I DNF'd it after that. I will not be continuing with this trilogy. I see why people like it. It is very cold. It is very Arctic. If you want something cold and set in like Russia in the winter time and people are very, very cold, that's it. This book is cold. That this is the perfect winter read for you. It just was not for me. It was very slow moving. It's a trilogy. So I think if this had been just one book, I would have enjoyed it if I could just have the whole story in one book, because it really is kind of a modern take on a fairy tale. Like it says, a Russian fairy tale, and like it was fine, but I had hopes in the beginning and then I got bored, and I think, like I said, if it had just been one story, it would have been fine. I honestly read the plot summaries of the other 2 books, and I mean, they sounded fine too, but I don't know, just a little too slow moving for me. The final book I read was a tiny little novella called Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, and this is sci-fi, also sort of horror, and it's also a movie, but it's a trilogy, and I realized that the second 2 books in the series get a lot bigger. So I actually decided not to read the second 2 because this one was just fine. I think I gave it 3 stars. Maybe I don't like sci-fi horror because it's never really that scary, but I liked the premise. I like the fact that the main characters don't have names. It's just these 4 women. There's like the surveyor, the psychologist, the anthropologist, and the biologist, who is also our narrator. And they go to this area X that no one knows what's there. Every time that they've tried to go to this place before, every expedition has had something terrible happen. Like one time it was mass suicide. One time it was all the members turned on each other and killed each other. One time they all came back and died of cancer. So like this area is just really mysterious. And this is the 11th expedition to this place. So I just had higher hopes, I suppose. I liked the mystery aspect of it, but once again, maybe if it were just one book instead of a trilogy, I probably would have enjoyed it a little bit better. So those are all the books I read in January. Let me know down below if you guys have read any of these books, what you thought, if you also hated The Starless Sea as much as I did, if you also loved Mount Char as much as I did, one of my favorite and least favorite books of all time now in the same month. So anyway, I will talk to you guys again later. Thanks guys for watching, and bye.